Mike Pompeo has been wrapping up his tour of 3 African countries by reinforcing Washington's credentials as the best option to drive business growth on the continent. And that's being impressed as a thinly disguised criticism, though, of China, which is Africa's largest trading partner. He told business leaders in Ethiopia to beware of authoritarian regimes and empty promises.
Be wary of authoritarian regimes with empty promises. They breed corruption, dependency. They don't hire the local people. They don't train. They don't lead them. They run the risk that the prosperity and sovereignty and progress that Africa so needs and desperately wants won't happen. We're committed to it. If there's one thing you should know about our president, my boss, you should know that he loves deals. He wants more to happen. He wants more to happen between the United States and nations all across Africa.
All right, joining me on set is Arise business correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya. Hi, Adefemi.
Hi, Rotus.
Hi. Welcome. So, what more do we have on what's Mr. Pompeo's trip to Ethiopia and what's been going on over there as far as... Yeah.
Well, Pompeo wrapped up his trip to Ethiopia. That's part of his 3 African country tour of Africa to, I guess, spread the good news of democracy. And that is what he says is what Ethiopia is doing so well. He commended Ethiopia on its rate of democratization, and also he really propped up the prospects of more economic growth in Ethiopia by pledging more financial aid to the country. It's worth noting, though, that Ethiopia has been doing so well. That's not a secret between us or between the viewers, and it would be really interesting to look at why Ethiopia is outperforming its regional neighbors and indeed its neighbors on the continent, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yes, indeed. Of course, you know, Africa has been projected to grow by about 2050. Continent with pretty much almost more than half or 1/3 of the world's population. So since we're talking about Ethiopia here, East Africa, we've got East Africa projected populations per the UN population division. So this is in millions. So year 2020 projected to be 331 million. This is, of course, for East Africa. Year 2035, 473 million. And then by the year 2050, a whopping 628 million. So the narrative has always been, how will Africa feed itself? Population growth is exceeding GDP growth. Sure. We're seeing the numbers here. Let's go to our next slide. Yes. Now, Ethiopia itself, population, second most populous nation in Africa after our dear Nigeria, 112 million. GDP per capita, a little bit on the low side, $953 per person. Life expectancy, 65.9. Now, this is a number that Ethiopia definitely has to work on. Adult literacy. 39%. So that's, I mean, across Africa, these numbers are in the low double digits, and they have to be improved because of educational money that needs to be spent on education. In fact, according to the United Nations, every nation needs to spend at least 15% of its budget, annual budget, on education, and that's something a lot of countries haven't met. So Ethiopia has to improve there. Inflation, we just talked about UK inflation, although that's a developed nation, so 1.8. We talked about Nigeria, which is at 12.13. Ethiopia is at 14.6, right? And then this is another key. This is part of why Pompeo came to Ethiopia. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Foreign direct investment. So I believe for 2019 is at 3.3 billion. So some figures on Ethiopia there as far as the statistics, as far as the nation is concerned. Let's get our next slide here. Yeah, this is the big one.
Well, this is the juice here, isn't it? Go ahead.
This is it. Between 2007 and 2017, over the last 10 years, average annual increase in GDP, as you said, the juice, look at them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the reasons why Pompeo is in town. Fastest growing economy over the last 10 years in the world, and it's in some pretty good company. I mean, you've been on top of the coronavirus for months now, right?
And remained healthy.
Right, exactly. So China's part of that. Turkmenistan is second place. So Ethiopia's first, 10.1. Turkmenistan is second, 9.5. Again, one more time for our viewers, this is average annual increase in GDP, so annualized over the last 10 years. So they've led the way because of a lot of promise. China, well, I mean, hey, 8.3%. By the way, I think I've discussed this before. Ethiopia depends a lot as far as export on China, which is why the coronavirus has pretty much affected everybody on this list.
Absolutely.
It's been massive.
And it's another reason why the United States were in town too. if we're looking at the prospects of economic growth in Africa, we already know that China has such an increased presence on the continent.
Exactly.
To the dismay of Americans, so you can understand why this was the time.
Thank you for bringing that up. Because as much as we rave about the economic situation and how promising it is, many say
that's a real scramble for Africa going on right now.
That's the real reason why.
What's really interesting is that even though we can see that Ethiopia is leading the way in terms of the pace, and that definitely projects an idea of positivity happening in the economy, it is worth noting, though, that in as much as we can be excited by these figures, if we look at the reasons why Ethiopia is growing, that does unveil a bit of concern, because in as much as we can see that GDP is one of the most important markers for economic growth, if we look at the reasons behind the economic growth in Ethiopia, it is because of an increased amount of government spending.
That is correct.
Right. They have the funds. That's not always a bad thing, but ultimately it doesn't reflect a population. A population who are employed, a population that is educated. And we already saw on the previous slide that Ethiopia is struggling with its adult literacy rate. So there are, in as much as we can be excited by these numbers, that's it. There are instances where, as you said, Ethiopia definitely needs to work on improving
literacy, and also the GDP per capita has to, because Nigeria, for instance, is about $2,000, so that $953 figure definitely has to go up. So they as you said correctly, they got some work to do. So let's get back there. Okay, so so Qatar, Myanmar, Uzbekistan, Laos, Rwanda, that's another country to watch, all right? Rwanda, Mongolia, and then India. I just finished talking about India, President Trump visiting them next week with Bode Oshoshimi over in London. All right, let's get to our next slide here. This is another interesting picture here. When we look at the big dogs in Eastern Africa, using the legend, Kenya, of course, is still the largest. As far as now, for our viewers, the percentage share of regional GDP for the entire East African continent. So, I mean, Kenya, when we talk about Kenya, it's tech, right? The tech, Adefemi, they lead the way in technology over in Kenya. The mobile money, M-Pesa, and also the M-Pesa revolution over there, you can buy bonds and invest through your mobile phone. It's actual currency. So Kenya is they're tops as far as GDP, percentage GDP for the region.
Just slightly.
Yes, just slightly. So Ethiopia is second place. All right. So again, as you pointed out, this speaks to the promise of the nation. Part of why Mr. Pompeo is there. All right. So they're in second place. Third place is Tanzania, little dark blue there. Tanzania at 19.9%, and then in fourth place is Uganda. Their president's a funny guy. Funny guy over in Uganda. I think they're trying to put sales taxes on SMSs and other things that they're doing.
They don't call him Money Museveni for no reason.
and then you got all the other tiny little other regions, Seychelles, Comoros. In fact, Seychelles, I think we just talked about that in our segment. One of the tax havens that the EU has fingered along with other countries. And then Comoros, Djibouti, Eritrea. But still, the main thing to take from this is that it's Kenya, it's Ethiopia, it's Tanzania, and Uganda. Those are the big ones. And our next slide here. Okay, so that's Pompeo.
When we're looking at the percentage there, there, this is Mr. Pompeo, definitely on the charm offensive, definitely looking at the rock star who is Abiy Ahmed.
Yes.
We know that he has done a lot in his first year at the helm of Ethiopia.
Yes.
I think one of the most notable events was him easing tensions and definitely ending that military presence with its neighbor, Eritrea. And that meant for a lot of people a completely different everyday experience. The borders were open, telephone lines were open. So again, in as much as that is a good thing for society, it is good for business, because now you've got another regional trading partner that you might not have had a better relationship beforehand. With Pompeo, though, again, like we said, this is almost like a Cold War issue, because they're in Africa. We see that they're meeting African leaders, but really this is a fly in the face of China, right? Indeed. We are going to fight for a share of this continent.
Promising
and in as much as you grow, you'll see the United States there as well.
Exactly. Okay, so that's the Ethiopian Foreign Minister, Gedu Andargacho. I watched him yesterday, went to the live feed. The Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize that Mr. Ahmed won for the, as you mentioned, easing tensions with Eritrea. That's why he won his Nobel Prize in 2019. And I know we've only got a minute left. Real quick, this is one of the things Pompeo wants to sort. Let's go to our next slide. I think it's our final slide. The dam that they're building being that has caused issues with Egypt, right?
Exactly.
So there's Ethiopia down there. Much of the construction that's actually coming through, Egypt is saying that the dam is going to cause problems, draw from their resources. They need the dam for electricity and so on and so forth.
This is it. As you've said, the river Nile runs across many of these countries.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what it is that Ethiopia is going to need time to fill its dams,
exactly.
right? So that it can actually work for its price. The issue there is Egypt and many other countries feel as though them filling up that dam would be detrimental to their supply.
That's exactly.
And then that falls into the arguments that, I don't know if you've heard of Pelita Clark, but she said years ago that the next world wars would be fought over water. So it's very interesting to see how this example flies into that. Ultimately, without water, there is no life. So you can see how important access to the River Nile is to all of these countries.
Interesting times. Adefemi Akinsanya in our Lagos studios joining me there to talk about the global issues with Ethiopia, the United States, and so on. Thank you so much for your insights there.